Dear colleagues, hello, welcome to our event. And today we are going to discuss the following topic: a drought and war, how this year's harvest will impact Ukraine's economy. The Center for Economic Strategy, together with the German economic team, invited you to join this event in its one of the meetings devoted to the economy of Ukraine during the war times. I'm Hlib Vyshlinsky. I'm going to moderate the event today. I'm the executive director of CES.
In English, please turn on the translation, the Zoom panel below. Також, оскільки наш формат
As our
передбачає
format
обмежену можливість ставити питання,
expects the limited possibility to
особливо
ask
на шляхом
questions
включення під
personally
час
uh,
вебінару,
during the webinar,
просимо
we
вас,
kindly ask you,
якщо у вас виникають
in
питання,
case you have
ставити
any
їх в
questions,
розділі
please ask
Q&A,
them in
бажано саме в
Q&A section.
Q&A, а не в
In
чаті,
Q&A
тому що в
section is much better
Q&A
than
спікери
the
можуть
webinar
напряму вам
chat because
відповідати
there in
на
Q&A
ці
section the
питання,
speakers can reply to your
як колеги
questions.
з АЦЕС, так і наші
The
визначені
colleagues from
учасники
CES and
дискусії,
other participants of this
яка
discussion,
є
you may also
тематичною
answer and
сьогодні.
reply your
Ще
questions from
раз,
Q&A
це
section.
є тема
And once again, today we are going to
врожаю.
discuss
Це
the
тема,
harvest. We are
яка
going
є
to discuss
такою
this topic, which
сезонною,
is quite seasonal.
яка
And
ще за старих часів в Україні завжди
since the
була
old times in Ukraine, we
такою, що
have had
найактивніше обговорюється
the
саме
most
в
actively discussed
серпні-вересні,
issue in
коли
August,
пік збирання
September, where this
врожаю,
is the peak, the climax of
різних
harvesting
культур від
of
зернових
different crops,
та олійних, на
grains,
які ми зараз в основному
oil
дивимося, до тих
crops, which are in the focus of our intention today,
сільськогосподарських продуктів,
and
продуктів
other
рослинництва, які
agricultural
не є
crops
настільки видимими
which are maybe not that much visible and
великій
focused on
статистиці, але які,
in the
наприклад,
big
є дуже
statistics, but
важливими
which are really
для
important
споживчого кошика
for the
українців. Це, зокрема, овочі, фрукти,
consumption basket of
насамперед
Ukraine,
овочі,
like
які мають
vegetables,
суттєвий
fruits,
вплив
and vegetables,
прямий теж
which
на
impact directly,
насамперед на гаманець українців
first of
через
all, the
їхні ціни,
pockets of
і
Ukrainians
відповідно
and
врожай теж має
their budgets. That is why
такий
harvest means
безпосередній вплив.
so much,
Отже,
and that's why it
сьогодні у
impacts
нас, як
directly the
завжди,
economy. Today, as usually, we have
спільний захід з
the
German Economic
joint
Team,
meeting with the
презентація
German economic
колег
team and the colleagues'
соціально-економічної
presentation from the
стратегії
Center
за
for Economic
основними
Strategy
секторами, і потім
by the
обговоримо,
main
власне,
sectors. Then we're
ситуацію
going to have the
в
discussion
з врожаєм цього року, і
of
почну,
the
оскільки це
special
спільний
topic,
проект
the
German
harvest.
Economic
And
Team,
this
з
is the joint event
того,
with the
що
German
передам
economic team. I would like to give it
на кілька
over
хвилин
to, for a
слово
couple of
для
minutes, I would like to give it
короткого
over
виступу нашому
for the
партнеру
short speech to our
Гаррі
partner,
Полушкіну, який є проектним менеджером
Garry
по
Polushkin, the
Україні. Гаррі,
project
прошу.
manager in Ukraine.
Дякую.
Gary,
Доброго
it's
дня,
over to you.
країна. Мене звуть Гаррі
Good
Полушкін.
day.
Мені
My name
дуже
is
приємно
Garry
оголосити
Polushkin. It's
сьогоднішній
really
вебінар.
nice and
Я
pleasant to be here
координатор по
present at this
Україні
webinar. I'm the
індексу
coordinator in Ukraine
команди.
of
Цей проєкт
GES.
фінансується
This project
Федеральним
is financed
міністерством
by the Federal
економіки
Ministry
та
of
захисту
Economy
клімату та
and
консультує уряди
Climate and
України
consults
з питань
Ukraine
економічної
on the
політики
range of
більше
issues
15
like
років.
economic
З
policy
початком
for 15
повномасштабної
years. Since the
війни
beginning of the full-scale
місцеві ми
invasion,
організовуємо
we
щомісячні
together with
вебінари,
the
які
CES have
надають
been
важливі
organizing monthly
можливості обговорити
webinars
стан економіки,
which give the
що є
possibility
регулярною
to
частиною
discuss
цього
the economy
захисту
situation,
та
which is the
специфічною
part of
темою. Сьогодні
our discussion
тема,
today as well. Today we're
який
going to
буде врожай
discuss
і
the
яке
following
це
topics:
вплине на
harvest,
економіку.
how it can impact the
На цей
economy.
сектор припадає
As for this
8%
sector, we have
валового внутрішнього
8%
продукту та
of
63%
GDP and
експорту.
63% of
Однак
export.
цей сектор
But
стикається
this
з
sector
проблемами
faces different
війни,
issues
війн
like
та
war,
важких погодних
mines,
умов.
and
Як бачить
unfavorable
розвиток
weather
експерти
conditions.
і
The
як
experts have the following vision.
слід очікувати для
What
економіки?
should we
Це
expect
важливі
from the
питання
economy?
сьогоднішньої
It's a very important
дискусії.
issue
Я
for
дуже
today's
вдячний
discussion, and I'm really
за цю
grateful
тему
for this
сьогодні.
topic
Дуже
today.
дякую.
Thank you so much.
Дякую, Гаррі.
Thank you, Gary.
Дякую за партнерство.
Thank you for this
Отже,
partnership.
переходимо до нашої
And let's
презентації.
come to our
Perедаю
presentation. It's
по черзі
over
слово колегам
to
і
my
починає, як
colleagues,
завжди,
and
Максим
let's
Самойлюк,
start
який є
with
керівником з
Maksym
нашої
Samoiliuk,
сторони цього
who is the
проекту,
chief of this project from our side.
загальним оглядом
This is the general summary of the economic situation. It's over to you, Maksym. Thank you, Hlib. Welcome, dear participants. Let's classically start with our presentation. Then we can come to the special topic subject. And I have a couple of slides about macroeconomic trends and what is going on there from the point of view of the report review. In our latest review, the IMF has upgraded their macro forecast, and according to it, the GDP in 2024 we will observe this growth by 3%. It's lower than NBU forecast of 3.7%. The IMF believes that the main factor that impacts this is the consequence of Russian attacks against energy infrastructure and definitely the impact of the war on labor market and the level of business expectations in the coming months. And accordingly to the Ministry of Economy, in July, GDP grew by 2.7%, and since the beginning of the year, it has increased. The growth is estimated at the level of 4%. In August, the business activity expectations index improved, and IMF believes that in the future we will expect the decrease then, and it will negatively impact the economy. But now we have another situation. The business is getting adapted to the activity with the electricity outages, to the difficult situation generally, and in August, the business activity expectation index improved to 48.7. It's still below the neutral level of 50 points. Generally, the expectations of businesses are negative, but it's much better if we compare with the previous months. If we speak about construction and trade, the sentiments in all the such sectors trade improved, so the situation is turning positive. Thank you. It's over to my colleagues.
Дякую, Максиме.
Thank you, Maksym.
Зараз ми трохи
And
змінюємо
now
порядок
we should
виступів.
change the
І
order of
починаємо
speeches,
з
and we will
такий
start
реальний
with
сектор, є
the
нереальний сектор,
sector,
і,
which is
власне,
the real
нереальний сектор
unreal
у нас
sector.
представлений
And our next speaker to represent this,
в монетарному секторі,
this is the
на
situation
валютному
with the
ринку,
monetary,
банківській
ethics,
системі.
and banking
Марія
sectors.
Томіліна, Маша, прошу до
Maria
слова.
Tomilina, Masha, it's over to you.
Вітаю всіх. Я дуже
Hello,
сподіваюся, мене
everyone.
добре
I
чутно
hope
і
you
видно.
can hear me. You
Супер.
can
Тоді
see my
почнемо.
screen. Then let's start.
Як завжди, почнемо з
As
аналізу
usual,
наших
let's start
ключових
with the
ставок.
analysis
Щодо
of our
облікової
key
ставки,
rate
поки що вона
policy.
залишається на
And
рівні
now the key policy rate has been
13%.
held steady at
Найближче засідання буде
13%.
вже наступному тижні.
The
Відповідно, ми
nearest
вже
session
наступного
will
тижня будемо
be
знати,
next week, and next
чи
week we will
збережеться
know
ставка, чи будуть якісь
whether
зміни.
this
В
rate
цілому
will
нагадаю,
stay
що
steady or will increase.
наприкінці
And
липня Національний
in
банк
late July,
вирішив
the
залишити ставку
NBU
на рівні 13%,
decided to
тобто
keep
вона
the
вже зберігалася
rate
досить
at
тривалий
the
час
same
для
level
того,
of
щоб
13%
забезпечити стійкість на
to
валютному
provide
ринку,
the
також
sustainability at a
захистити
fixed
гривневі
market, to
заощадження
safeguard household
інфляції, в цілому
hryvnia
привести
savings
її
and
до
aligning
таргету у
inflation
найближчі
with
роки.
the 5% target over the
Щодо
forecast period.
ставок
As for the
по депозитам, то
deposit rates,
вони продовжують поступово
they
знижуватися. Причина
continue
це ще
decreasing, and there is
попереднє
another
зниження
reason for
облікової
this.
ставки, так, оскільки
The
все в нас немає
previous
immediate
decrease
таких
of the interest rate,
ефектів, все йде з певним лагом.
and
І
everything works
відповідно
accordingly
вони
to
продовжують
the
поступово знижуватися, але не
strategy.
надто швидко. Але
Yields
в
will surpass both
цілому є
BNB's inflation
вищими,
projection
ніж
and households
очікувана
inflation
інфляція
expectations, shielding
і
hryvnia
інфляційні
saving from
очікування
inflation.
домогосподарств теж. Щодо
As
інфляції,
for
то
inflation,
вона пришвидшилася у серпні до
it got accelerated to
7,5% рік по року. В
7.5,
щомісячному порівнянні то це
and in August
0,6%.
2024,
В
it's, if
цілому
we speak compared
причина,
to the previous
чому
months, it's
інфляція зросла,
0.6%. Why it has
тут
accelerated?
ми говоримо про
Here we should speak about
врожаї. Знову ж таки, головна
harvests.
тема так нашого
This is the
сьогоднішньої
main
зустрічі.
topic of
На
our
жаль, в
meeting
цьому
as
році
well.
через значну
Unfortunately,
посуху
this
вони
year, because of the
не
droughts,
вони є нижчими, ніж попередні
the
роки.
harvest level, the
Також
yield
це
level is
збільшення
much lower
витрат
than previous
бізнесу
years, and the
на
expenditures of the
сировину,
business for
енергію
energy, for raw materials, and
та
raw
оплату
products,
праці.
and the labor payment, and as well as all the rest of the factors impacted. So this inflation pressure will stay steady, driven by the poor harvest, high business costs, and hryvnia's recent depreciation. And here we should speak about the increase of exercises and depreciation of hryvnia also should be taken into consideration. There are still some positive news about the monetary and FX sector. International reserves grew by 13.7%, which is $42.3 billion due to large inflows from the international partners. My colleague will add to this a bit later. And this way we have some rate, and owing to the data we got from NBUs, and in August, hryvnia also demonstrated some depreciation, but at the end we could see some really slight, moderate depreciation. But what is good is that the National Bank of Ukraine has offered some and also strengthened some of the norms. And it's about the expenditures abroad with those cards using the foreign currency. And I would like also to mention what is happening with the credits and deposits. Generally, what we can see with the household deposit resumed growth. And if we speak about hryvnia term and on-demand deposits have shown a decline in volumes, while foreign currency deposits have resumed growth. Why this way? Why hryvnia has shown a decline? Because of the worsening exchange rate expectations and because of the increased spending of the population on energy equipment. If we speak about loans, then and lendings, here we can see that corporate and retail lending continue to recover modestly. Both of hryvnia and foreign currencies. And it's really interesting that now the National Bank started publishing information about how what is the situation with lending as for energy infrastructure and its recovery. For example, since June till August, the credits have been provided for 5.8 billion hryvnia. So banks approved those 5.8 billion hryvnia loan in application for energy infrastructure. That's it from my side. It's over to Hlib.
Дякую, Машо. Далі
Thank you, Masha.
я передаю
And
слово
I
Юрію
would like to
Гайдаю,
give it
який
over
розкаже про те,
to
що у нас відбувається з
Yurii
бюджетом.
Gaidai, who is going to explain the situation with the budget. And I hope now you can see my presentation with any problems. I should say that I still can see those squares, but it's all right. We still can see your presentation. It's visible. So, Yurii, it's over to you. So now let's discuss this. First of all, about tax revenues. And they demonstrate really nice dynamics. In August, tax revenues of the state budget in August were 150 billion hryvnia. It's more than in August last year, and the main drivers are the CPT, primary taxation of banks with 25% tax rate, which makes really great part of their taxation incomes, and PIT have increased as well, and transfer of military PIT from the local budgets, and nice dynamics we can see from my exercises, and it can be explained by better administration and probably counteracting some male payment of taxation, exercise taxation. And we will definitely see the better results, I believe, later on. So here we should mention that the parliament is expected to consider tax increase package. Lately it was failed in Verkhovna Rada, and now this is the second round of this tax increase package, and the main options, if we make judgment from the discussions, here we speak about increased military levy from personal income, military levy for private entrepreneurs, and CPT, advanced for fuel retailers. And we should really help to release the situation. There were also some discussions about the 50% windfall CPT for banks, with strong support from deputies and tax committee and the party in power, but there was the strong opposition from the Ministry of Finances and the National Bank of Ukraine, so it's difficult to forecast what should be the outcome of this discussion. And now we don't consider the increase of the tax for added value. If we speak about the data available, we can see the state budget expenses net of in-kind military support reached 11.6% if we compare to the previous year, this increase, and the expenses for defense and security. Here we should also once again mention that we are preparing the classification where defense includes the procurement of drones, and security, it's on about the security function, just like a security service and the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So, and now defense and security expenses reached 1.143 billion hryvnia. So if we check the taxation, dividends, all the incomes, the National Bank income, it's about 140 billion, and it's also about the bonds, which also bring the revenue. And this definitely we expect the increases in August. We don't have we lack some of the data. First, we can see better taxational incomes and revenues, and if we speak about those hostilities, definitely require great significant investments. And let's glimpse into the local budgets. Last year we wanted to make a model and how we can change the structure of incomes and how the situation looks like now. We can see that the incomes to the local budget is almost at the same level, so the total revenues for 7 months remained on par with 2023, and the distribution of budgets by balance is returning to pre-war pattern. Why over half of the budgets deviate within 10% of zero balance? So like last year, the condition of the budgets was much better. How has the structure changed? And 35 billion hryvnia. And here we speak about the PIT, so loss of military PAT by local budgets, partly compensated by local taxes. Here we speak about CPT and exercise and transfers from the state budget, and also if we speak about non-tax revenues, here we can mention the dotation increase from the local budgets, the subventions, and almost 4 billion hryvnia of non-taxational income. It's for selling the property and other assets from the municipal property. This way we come to these numbers.
In terms of the foreign assistance, we have here quite significant incoming. It was 80.5 billion, namely 4.5 billion were received from the European Union, 3.9 billion came as grants from the US. In this way, the Ukrainian government says that the need for foreign financing this year will be fully covered. There is the expectation it will be all right. Nevertheless, as was mentioned before in the previous overview, there is a certain uncertainty in terms of foreign financing for next year. It still remains. We are also seeing that the dynamics of covering additional needs with the foreign aid over 8 months of 2024, this share is 78%. This was more than we had for the first 2 years of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, there is some expectation that this share is expected to decline in the coming months due to a decrease in the amount of monthly disbursement from foreign partners. That's all. Passing the floor to my colleagues. Thank you, Yurii. And now Volodymyr Landa, the last part, which is not about the agriculture, which is about the agriculture. Please do give us some sectoral analysis, what was happening in various sectors of Ukrainian economy. Unmute yourself. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear viewers. Shortly about main sectors of the Ukrainian economy. I'll start traditionally from the energy sector. In August, Ukraine was forced to import 461 gigawatts of electricity. This is almost half as much as in each of the previous 2 months, apart from June and July of last year. We see some dynamics on the graph. On the 25th of August, the daily export dropped to 4 gigawatt. This was the lowest level since early May. And it was even announced that we will come back to the export of the energy, but the following day, Russia made it impossible, having launched the most massive shelling of Ukrainian energy facilities in history. The anti-air defense compared to October 2022 were progressing, so it was less percentage of damage was initiated. Nevertheless, it still remains a significant problem for the Ukrainian energy that will have its consequences for many, many more months to go. Among other news, there was a huge news, the dismissal of the supervisory board, dismissing of Volodymyr Kudrytsky from the position of the chairman of the board, although he received a lot of support from the expert community and international community of Mr. Kudrytsky. This dismissal did take place. This was the possibility to concentrate the full control of the process of energetic recovery and centralization of such processes. And there are some concerns that such decision will be quite a lot of resonance, and it could create quite a lot of problems for the investment clients and for the system of corporate governance. The other main news was the announcement from Energoatom about the preparation to continue implementation of the Chigirin nuclear power station construction project. Again, this decision is also very much controversial because it can have certain consequences in many, many years, and it will require huge resources which are absolutely absent from the country at the moment. I mean, we didn't have any really bright news in the energy sector. Unfortunately, the background is quite negative there. In terms of metallurgy, the situation is slightly better, although the production of steel is the lowest over the last 5 months, but still, it's still the biggest since the start of the full-scale invasion. Namely, in August, Ukraine produced 644,000 tons. This was a 3% decrease compared to the previous month. In general, the market situation is not very favorable at markets. In China, the internal consumption is decreasing. That's why a lot of cheap Chinese steel is going to international markets. Also, the global iron ore prices fell to $91 per ton. This was the lowest since 2022. And basically, there are also some negative consequences, are quite moderate. If we compare with the same period of 7 months of the previous year, the production of the main products still increased by some 20-30%. When it comes to IT industry, we see certain moderate positive tendencies. We jumped back from the bottom. We increased our exports to $545 million. This is a significant decrease compared to previous periods. Within 7 months, this was 5%, but in general, the export has exceeded $3.75 billion, and the United States remains the main direction for such services. And the next is the UK, Malta, and Cyprus, accounting 7% of each. And in terms of the agricultural industry, we would like to mention that the export in agriculture grew to 4.6 million tons. It grew by 9%. We have data for 7 months, and they say that some $14 billion was the exports of agricultural and food products, and that accounts for 63% of total merchandise exports of goods, and the share of Black Sea ports continues to be taking leadership roles, and this is mainly the export channel, but it's another 5.4% exported by road. That's actually the highest number in the last 11 months. About the tendency of the agricultural land market, we will talk in a special topic for which I'm passing the floor to colleagues.
Так, Володя, дякую.
Yes, Volodya, thank you.
Власне, переходимо до спеціальної теми, і я коли
We are coming to a special topic, and when I was presented this topic, it sounded a little bit lazy, that we didn't think of any better topic in the beginning of September, because it was the beginning of September, but it's not. Because of the exchange, we found out about the Telegram channel I am Kurkul when I signed myself up, and starting from which some moment in time in the summer, I started to be surprised with some negative news which appeared in this particular channel. They were so very brightly at a level of micro level. Using the example at micro businesses, they started to show how the weather started to beat up the prospects of harvest. So we decided to take on this subject, and we asked to make a review of what exactly is to be expected with the situation. Our very long-term colleague with the research of the Ukrainian economy, with the focus of agri sector, Nataliia Shpyhotska, who is the deputy head of the Dragon Capital Research. Natalia, how many years you're working with the agri sector as the researcher? More than 10 years. More than 10 years. I mean, the more how long I know you, we can see that you're working in this sphere for 10 years. Okay, let me pass the floor to you for presentation, and then we will talk to other participants what they think about it. Thank you, Hlib. Let me turn on my presentation. Tell me, do you see it nicely? Ideally, everything is fine. So, as was mentioned before today, colleagues, really the agricultural sector still remains very actual. It was also mentioned the export of agricultural products is more than 60% of the whole products of Ukraine. That's why the dynamics of production and its future export is one of the key components for the macroeconomic stability and the export revenue of Ukraine. So that topic deserves special attention. And really this year came out somewhat more difficult compared to the previous one, because the previous 3 years, starting from 2021, were quite favorable for Ukraine in terms of the weather conditions and in terms of their influence on the harvest of the main agricultural products of Ukraine. We understand in 2021, in the last pre-war year, Ukraine could get the record harvest for oilseeds. This was 109 million tons. After the start of the full-scale war, the overall score of harvest decreased because we lost some territories, the occupation. Nevertheless, with the favorable conditions, although all the challenges for agricultural producers, we got quite good results. So last year we received even the record harvest for wheat, and it was the second best for corn, which was very good. But it's not possible that the lightning will come in one the same place. So this year turned out to be much more complicated. This was reflected in the temperature records that we remember in the middle of the summer. And unfortunately, this was also accompanied by the less rainfall, which really expanded the unfavorable climatic conditions. On this slide, we can see one of the illustrations of this. This is the map of the European agency Mars that does monitoring of the influence of weather conditions on agriculture in the world. And we can mention that part of Ukraine, drawn in red and yellow, means that this year, unfortunately, the eastern and central most of Ukraine received a significant influence of both high temperatures and a low number of rainfall, which brought the drought around. And if we look at the statistics about the cumulative precipitation this year, we can see that this influence of unfavorable weather conditions, this was not uniform regarding all the territory of Ukraine. The biggest influence, once again, it's the southern and partially eastern and central oblast. There is also less precipitation in the western oblast, so it didn't have that much impact in the west. But from the point of view of weather conditions, this year the situation looks not so optimistic, and its influence on the expectations of this year's harvest shall be divided into two components. First of all, it's the early cultures, mainly oilseeds, which the farmers planted autumn last year, and namely they received a lot of impact not only of the dry weather conditions this year, but also moderate weather conditions last autumn and last winter, and also the impact on late cultures that we talk about a little bit later. On this graph, you can see the dynamics of the yield of the early cultures, namely wheat, barley, and rapeseed. That's where basically is already finished the harvesting. And we really see that the influence of these conditions to harvest was not so significant. If we look at also, it has decreased to 1%, and the harvest yield fell down further. For barley, there was decrease by 7%. For rapeseed, it was 15% change, but it was more this uniform decrease of the yield and of the areas planted. So the losses for the early group were not so significant. At the same time, if we're talking about the expectation of the late cultures, namely corn, sunflower, and soybeans, which are the main components for exports, because corn is exported as animal feed culture, sunflower we are actually processing and exporting with the added value as oil and cake. That will be quite much more noticeable. So our farmers who are just starting to collect this, harvest these late cultures, for soybean already 20% are harvested, 15% of sunflower, and less than 5% of corn. Namely, we have only the first indicative results about the yield, and we understand that harvesting starts with the southern oblasts, where the ripening is earlier than on average, and we understand since this oblasts this year in the south and in the east received more influence of these unfavorable conditions, and they can be reflected this impact of the negative weather conditions, but they cannot be ideal proxy for the dynamics of the harvesting that we can expect. So if we look at the sunflower, the average yield for Ukraine fell by 18% year to year, and we can see that this fall was much more strong, especially in the southern oblasts and partially in the central ones, while in central, western and northern it was quite moderate. For soya, we have seen that the yield was the 20% of collected. The yield fell by 25% compared to the same indicator at the beginning of 2023. So soybean probably would suffer the biggest because of its necessity for more favorable condition. For corn, although the collected areas are not so representative, it's early to talk about the preliminary dynamics of the yield. Nevertheless, most likely the first results of harvesting in the southern region, they will also demonstrate quite a significant decrease of the yield. Another indicator which should be taken into account when forecasting the yield of the late crops is the dynamics of the indication which is called normalized difference vegetation index, which is developed and which is calculated by the Ministry of Agri Policy of the United States. It's called NDVI. On this slide on the graph, we can see the dynamics of abnormalities of NDVI, meaning to which extent at the beginning of September every year, this abnormality of the vegetation index compared to its average long-term level, to which in each particular year it is different from a normal year to a worse or to a better level. So as at the beginning of September 2024, this abnormality of NDVI index is the worst over the previous 12 years. So it's also important to understand that exactly the dynamics of NDVI to every separate date, it's not an ideal guidance for forecasting the final yield, because we understand that it's a moment indicator. It captures a certain moment, so it demonstrates the condition, what is in the field, and it doesn't take into account possible future influence of weather conditions before the harvesting ends and their further development. I mean, as we discussed in 2023, Ukraine received the record yield for wheat and the second best result for corn. Nevertheless, the abnormalities were not the biggest in positive in the history, but taking into account this index, we can make already a conclusion that we can expect quite a significant decrease of the yield of the late cultures this year.
We come to some prospects. Those results about early grain and oilseeds harvest, and considering the preliminary results of the early grains harvesting and the prospects for a deterioration in the yields of later crops, corn, sunflower, and soybean, and colza, we can expect the total grain and oilseeds harvest in Ukraine this year to decline by 10% compared to the previous year, and it will be 74 billion tons. Anyway, it will be more than enough to provide the food security for Ukraine, and it's enough to pursue with the exporting the main crops, and Ukraine will continue being the food security provider in the world. And if we speak about the exports of grains and oilseeds, what can we expect in the current season, 2024-2025 years? Besides the dynamics, besides this forecasted 10% decline, the dynamic of the rest from the previous year will impact the current year situation since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Almost at the top of the year, the work of the most of the ports has ceased, so we had to choose deny or railways delivery transportation methods, and they were not able to provide the pre-war levels of exports. And after 2021, crop yields harvesting, we had really nice arrests, almost more than 20 million tons, which we gradually unloaded. As for 2023-24, we can assess that the amount has decreased to 15 tons. Those remains, and exports of grain and oilseeds in 2024-25 may decline by 15%. And as soon as Ukraine could deliver that amount of ships we required, finally we could come back to at least some levels, and those remains of the main crops are at their normal pre-war levels, 5-8 million tons, and Ukraine will have less additional remains from the previous season to export in the new season. So we have two negative factors impacting the situation: the decline of grain and oilseeds export, and the export may decline by 12-15% this way, up to 48-50 million tons. So it's also worth mentioning that besides these fundamental factors, also there are other factors to influence the dynamics of grain exports, like stability of the deep water ports of Ukraine. And again, we can see that Russia again attacked the civilian vessel exporting wheat grain from Ukraine. Fortunately, this vessel could continue its route, but we should remember about the risks to this sustainable activity of the ports. Another factor that may influence the dynamics, the dynamics of prices for grains and oilseeds on world markets. The farmers faced such issues of great amount of remains when we had to preserve the crops in portable, for example, special packages, as we didn't have enough of those permanent mill houses. Now there was the problem how to store the remains of the grains. There were some ways to be found out. So now the farmers have the better possibility to keep the grain or sell the grain or keep the grain if they believe that the pricing is not appropriate for them, and can sell their grain as soon as they find the pricing appropriate for selling grain. And we hope that it won't impact that sufficient that much on this dynamic of exporting, but nevertheless, the minimal exports pricing also is the way of how to stabilize, balance the situation, how to counteract the grain market as the shade grain market, as the regulatory means vessels also can be really helpful. So we will see how it can work out and how they will demonstrate their productivity. That's it from my side, Hlib. Thank you, Natalia. Just like the invest banker should have done, you have covered, first of all, those products, what Ukraine uses to work on the world markets, and what is the most crucial for Ukrainian economy for production from the point of view of production, manufacturing, GDP. Then you can stop sharing your screen and I can present another participants of our agrarian panel, Taras Vysotskyi. Taras, for a long period of time, was the executive minister, acting minister, but now we have a new minister. Taras could finally come back to his work as the first deputy minister of agrarian policy and food of Ukraine. Tetiana Adamenko, the head of the Department of Agrometeorological Forecast in Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Center, and as drought is the topic which is in the base of our discussion about the risks of production in agro sector. And from agrarian business, we have the representative, and we have invited Vyacheslav Chuk, who is the chief commercial officer of Astarta-Kyiv. And we decided to give the floors to the biggest agrarian players on Ukrainian market. Astarta continues old Ukrainian tradition of sugar production business. This is the leader in this segment. They continue in all smaller segments of agrarian sector. A few words about those issues I suggest us to discuss. Taras, I believe Taras should answer the question. Some call, really important one, and I suggest to give it over to Tetiana. And in your speech, I would like to ask you to mention some points, and I want to ask Taras Vysotskyi to mention this as well. Please tell us more about the forecasts of Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Center, how the situation may change with the weather conditions for agrarian sector, and how it can impact harvesting the crops and the probable impact upon the harvest for the next year. In case you have any questions about what Natalia has mentioned, you are more than welcome to ask. Taras, are you ready to speak up? Well, hello, dear colleagues. Taras, then I would like also to ask you a clarifying question. Natalia, as you could see, has covered consistently the main crops. And I could see that today among the participants, there are a couple of colleagues from the National Bank. Probably it would be interesting to them as well. Maybe you could speak more and focus more on those crops which are not for the market important, but important for Ukrainians as consumers. What is the situation with the fruits, vegetables? How has this pricing changes can impact the inflation and the well-being of Ukrainians, the real one? And what is the vision of ministry what is not covered by stock news? What can you share with us? Taras, it's over to you. Thank you. Indeed, Ms. Natalia has provided a very comprehensive expertise presentation, and indeed, from different resources, we have the same information, which is verified. And to be short, to describe those non-grain and non-oil seed crops, and you have mentioned Vyacheslav as the representative of the sugar production company. We should mention that we have quite significant sugar production, and indeed this out 1,600,000 of beetroot been supplanted, so that's enough for their domestic market and for export. There is some potential. There is an issue with the access to EU market, but as for the indicators, it's enough as for the amount. As for other crops, the situation is more or less nice. So if we speak about oats, peas, beans, if we speak about millet and buckwheat, so we have the remains from the previous year, which is enough for the whole year, so we won't face the significant inflation. If we speak about feed crops, definitely the droughts have impacted this. Here we can see the decrease in production, increase in pricing for dairy products, and we expect that it will be balanced soon, but there is a trend that dairy products are the drivers of inflation, and definitely for the reason of the decrease of production. If we speak about poultry, pork, eggs, here we currently don't observe any variations, so we have more or less sustainable results and indicators from month to month. So the preliminary forecast demonstrates that no dramatic changes are expected. Gardening. As for the vegetable crops, we are self-sustainable. We don't have overproduction. We don't have surplus production. We can see extra cheap pricing. But as for balancing, as for the objective pricing for vegetables, the pricing is appropriate. So again, if we speak about importing or export is not expected, export or import are not expected, so the local market, domestic market is satisfied. For some period of time, we have left the right bank of Kherson, Zaporizhia. We lost this part, but that is why we cannot expect too low pricing, because the producers can understand the consumption, that the consumption has decreased. So we can see this range. There will be definitely some range and a spread between the prices for spring and autumn. And definitely we have the remains from the last year. If we speak about apples, blueberries, strawberries, or watermelon, or some other crops, we have a nice level of production. We are fully sustainable, self-sustainable. We have some remains for export for any vegetable, fruit group. So storing is quite expensive. That is why energy situation will impact this pricing. Electricity will be costly, expensive this year, so the impact of energy system will be greater. For example, last year we had more sustainable energy supply and cheaper one, but physically this energy supply is enough. If we take into consideration those aggregated numbers, if we speak about late grains and oil seeds, there will be 100% drop. As Ms. Natalia has mentioned, it's difficult to forecast such numbers, because in those groups we have some part, some share of the rural households and private households, and we cannot say that we have underproduction and we cannot say that we have overproduction. So the pricing will stay within the same range. If we speak about what is critical, what is really important to understand, so we can harvest our crops without doubts. And the next period, two things are important. Main thing is the energy and availability and access to this energy. It will impact the cattle growing. It's also important for animal growing. And in case we have problems with the energy, it means that the meat processing should increase. Animal breeding will definitely undergo the impact of energy production, and definitely it will impact the pricing for meat products. And this year the weather cannot impact that much this year's slaughtering, for example, the animals in the household. So I believe we're going to have the same pricing on the market on the same level. Thank you, Taras. About pricing, I have a question. We could see from the statistics for August a quite noticeable price increase if we speak about food products. Do I understand you correctly that maybe 1 month more and this effect of pricing, if we compare to the last year when we had really great results, best results, top results as for the crops, and we had lower pricing for crops, and then should we expect anything horrible in the future? Indeed, August is demonstrates the consequences of July problems with the electricity and energy supply, but as for now, any background, any grounds for any unbalance is not expected. And this year we have already adapted to the situation, and no fluctuations of pricing are not expected. And so we already have the streamline to move along. So I believe we shouldn't expect any great fluctuations as for the pricing. Now let's come to the situation with the weather, and maybe we could look back in the past. Tetiana probably could find it useful to discuss. So for the first time, we have invited the representatives of Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Center for such an economical event this year. There are reasons for this. Welcome, Ms. Tetiana. It's over to you. Good day, everyone. This invitation was really exciting to me. I'm really grateful because the weather conditions this year, and I, a person with experience, was really wondered and I was really surprised. So probably we should not be surprised anymore. As the latest decade in Ukraine, we can observe extraordinary cataclysms interconnected with the global warming, because we outpace many of the countries by the level of global warming. This summer is the hottest for the period. This year is the hottest summer period for 10 years, and according to some other observations, the hottest summer in 120 years. And the latest decade, we could observe the hottest summers, the warmest winters, and falls, autumns. And we could sense during the latest decade, we could experience all the wonders of global warming. As for the current year, as for today, for the 12th of September, the average temperature of the air in Ukraine, if we compare to the first of the numbers we have from the 1st of January, then temperature record is for a few grades higher than expected. So in 1.52 degrees are the expected increase in the temperature, but we outpaced these indicators. If we compare to the previous year, summer season this year is longer for for a month. So now we have plus 1 more month of summer. If we take into consideration the situation in Ukraine, definitely from this point of view, it's not so bad. As for 2023, 2023 was the hottest year in the world. 2024 has the same perspectives. If we speak about the current conditions, so I will not repeat what Natalia has beautifully mentioned. So she is here now an expert also as for hydrometeorology. There are some issues, but it's all right. So you have perfectly started with all those early grains, and I believe that for the situation we are having in Ukraine, that we have quite nice harvest. As for the late crops, we had great expectations. It could be so, but for the extra warming, those warmth waves and waves of hot weather with the temperatures over 35, 40 degrees above zero. For example, Mykolaiv, for 30 days, that was the high temperature there. The temperature was over 35 and was reaching 42 degrees above zero centigrades in Mykolaiv. So simply those crops could not continue growing. They simply die of temperature stress.
By the way, these waves of heat were so lengthy for all territory of Ukraine. In the western oblasts, in terms of the climate, in case there was 35 days, it will be a climatic event. And we understand that the number of days, it was like 70 degrees. It was very much hot in the western oblasts. And also, what is defining the harvest in Ukraine, it's the amount of precipitation. That's where we had a very harsh deficit on average in Ukraine. In the summer, there was only 50% of the normal precipitation levels. Just for you to understand, there must be 150, 200 millimeters, while only 50, 70 millimeters fell. And in the outset of high temperatures, this precipitation was absolutely not effective. And for instance, in Mykolaiv Oblast, over the 3 summer months, there were 2 to 4 days in the south, the rains. So what could grow in such a situation? And the result of these weather conditions, it's of course, we have one of the most serious summer droughts. The amount of precipitation, amount of humidity that is evaluated by the Hydrometeorological Service, it's 70% or even more are covered with drought, which should not be planted with winter crops. Only in 2011, in 2015, we had so significant summer and spring droughts, where we have always we would have really dry upper layers of soil, so quite dry 1 meter layer, only some small areas in the west. Thanks to the rains in the beginning of September, which were not so expected, but really they harmed more than they helped. In Mykolaiv Oblast, Odessa Oblast received a lot of rain. Now it's more or less fine there. So nowadays we have the following picture with the drought, summer and spring. But again, nothing is yet lost. We still can do the planting for more months, even in the beginning of October. This could be even the end of October or beginning of November. I remember a few years, certain areas were really planted in the beginning of December even. So it can really work well with the harvest of next year. But within the upcoming days, we will not see any cardinal changes. maybe the situation in the western part of Ukraine, also Odessa, Vinnytska, western regions, the central oblasts, we don't expect and the southern part of the country will be under the influence of the high atmospheric pressure, and we would not have precipitation that could really change the situation. We don't expect that. So the summer will last another 7-10 days. Thank you.
Дякую, дуже дякую, Тетяно.
Many thanks,
Дякую, що ви
Tetiana. Many
трохи
thanks.
цю дискусію з короткострокової
Thank you for
конкретно цей врожай
giving us the update that we brought this discussion from short term into more short-term tendencies. I hope that Taras can come back to us.
Так, ніби вже все знову в порядку в Тараса зі зв'язком.
Everything's all right with the connection of Taras. Taras,
В'ячеславу з Астарти передам слово.
I
Хотів
can
би
pass the
вашу
floor to him.
реакцію, тому що дійсно ми завдяки Тетяні так трохи про довгострокові тенденції почали говорити.
We started to talk about some long-term tendencies. What is the vision of the state? Which steps
в державній політиці міністерство бачить для того, щоб, власне,
what steps the ministry
не те,
sees
щоб зменшити вплив цих кліматичних змін, але
in order to
допомогти сектору
change
адаптуватися до
and maybe
кліматичних
to help
змін,
this sector to
які,
adapt to these climatic
трохи
changes
затьмарені
that were somewhat marred
попередніми врожаями,
by the
погодними
previous
умовами, але
successful
очевидно, що особливо
harvests
в
and
регіональному
successful
розрізі, те, що
conditions.
показувала Наталя на картах, є дуже вираженим. Прошу.
And that's very much
Дякую. Ми
is
бачимо, якщо
seen.
говорити, два основних вектора
We see two main vectors.
реакції, так, чи політики
If
для
we talk
того,
about
щоб
the
максимально
reactions and
зменшити,
policies
віддалі
in order
нівелювати
to
ті ризики, які приносять
mitigate the risks that
нестабільний, я б так сказав,
we
погодні фактори.
get this
Які
from
це два
unstable weather
напрямки?
conditions.
Один
What
з
are
них
these two
це
directions? One of them,
відновлення меліорації.
it's first of
То ми
all
чітко
is the
розуміємо,
recovery
що
of
маючи
melioration.
десь
We
осушення, але
have
більш фактично
once
зрошення
we
і
have
меліорацію, фактично
irrigation.
можна
Basically, we can have
фактором
with this
спеки
factor
та
of
відсутності
heat
опадів
and the
керувати.
absence of
А в цій частині
precipitation,
у нас
we
є
can
декілька
still manage
піднапрямків.
this, and we have several
Фактично цього року
subdirections in
діє
this.
і буде наступного року діяти. Є
This
програма
year we have, and
підтримки
it will be next year, there will be a
інвестицій в
program of
меліорацію. То ті
supporting investment into
агровиробники або
melioration.
організації
So those agro
ОВК,
producers or the
організації
organizations,
водокористувачів, тобто
the
об'єднання
organizations
агровиробників,
of water
вони,
users, the
інвестуючи
amalgamations
в
of
системи зрошення,
agro producers, they
можуть
can
отримати від
invest
держави до
into
50%
irrigation systems.
компенсації
They
вартості
can
цих
get
інвестицій.
back some
Будуючи
50% of the
системи зрошення
investment.
або
Building the
відновлюючи системи
irrigation
зрошення.
system or renewing
А якщо говоримо про дощувальні
irrigation
машини, то
systems,
вони
especially if we talk
25% отримують
about
компенсацію,
the raining
коли
machines,
купують
they can
вітчизняні
get
дощувальні машини.
25%
Другий
compensation for
напрям,
buying
ми хочемо, незважаючи на ці
Ukrainian-produced water
складності,
machines.
знайти ресурси,
The
щоб
second
наступного року
direction, we're trying to find the
почати
resource that
будівництво
next year we
відновлення
will
державних магістрал,
start
там, де треба державі довести воду до
renewing
поля,
the
до
state
агровиробника.
water
Ми
pipelines
розуміємо,
where
що
it's
руйнування
necessary
Каховської ГЕС
to
це такий виклик
bring
принесло,
the water
разом з
to
тим
the
треба
agricultural producer.
відновлювати, треба далі працювати.
Kakhovka
Це не
dam was
окрім
blown
Каховської ГЕС
up,
в
but
цілому
we
в
need to
інших місцях,
continue to work,
в
and
наших
it's apart
регіонах.
from
Тобто
Kakhovka hydropower
робити
station.
інвестиції
In
в
other
доведення
places, we should
води,
make investment
джерела
in
води
bringing
до
water,
полів, щоб далі
the
аграрії могли
sources of water
інвестувати
to the
в
fields, so
користуватися
that
і
agrarians could
активно
use this
працювати
water and actively work
міжнародним партнерам.
with
Такий
our
проект
international
Harvest
partners.
при USAID запланував до 50 мільйонів
We
доларів
have
на
a
5 років.
project
Знову ж підтримку фермерів,
from the
підтримку
USAID
організацій
project
водокористувачів
with some
для
$50 million
будівництва насосних
to
станцій,
support
енергоефективних,
farmers to
відповідно
build
обладнання.
pumping
То
stations,
один з
energy
глобальних
efficiency.
напрямків це
And so one of the global
зрошення, так,
directions
тобто
is
меліорація,
actually
яка може
irrigation, meaning
максимально
melioration
нівелювати
that can
вплив
mitigate
погодних
the
факторів.
influence of these weather
І другий
conditions.
напрям – це
And the
агрострахування.
second condition
Ще
is
2021 року
agri
ми, як
insurance. Back in
Мінагрополітики, активні були
2021,
учасниками цього
we as
процесу.
the
Був
active
урядовий законопроект,
We, as the Ministry of Agrarian Policy, we were active participant of that, and the Verkhovna Rada adopted a law on agricultural insurance. And in this 2022, we wanted to launch this system. We understand since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the priorities changed, but we still understand that this must be done. So we need to launch this. First of all, we need to rebuild trust from insurance companies. And there is a new procedure. NBU can make the verifications because NBU has the trust, so they can really check and they can say that these companies do meet the requirements, so that the agrarians would understand that we, as Ministry of Agriculture Policy, develop standardized insurance products. That's like insurance agreement, where everything will be prescribed. Like somebody would not read some paragraph, there is no trust, there is no payment. So just bank details and signature. Please take it, use it, and these things are regulated. Also, the sugar beet, the grains, we already have that. And the third, the international practice shows, since the agricultural insurance is quite expensive, from 5 to 8% of the premiums. So creating this new massive insurance, it works such a thing as state support. That's why we can talk to exporters and somehow start, in accordance to legislation, we can have the possibility to compensate up to 50%. We just need to have the resource. So in some long-term projects, 5-7 years, it's important to have the trust that it will be really massive and the insurance premium would go down, and that could work more. It was lending 579. Always at the start, you need to really to moderate it, to facilitate it from the state. So that's the second direction, because you can ensure the yield or the income. And once again, in case you have some force majeure, some weather conditions, this is something that can be covered by the insurance. That's why understanding these challenges, that they could be even more often. So that's where we see two long-term responses that could help us in this respect. Thank you. Thank you, Taras, for this clarification. Do you already know? Have you already agreed with the Ministry of Finances your request for the budget formulation? It is being finalized now. We will be clearly understanding next week about the draft project in the first reading. This was discussed. There is the understanding. In the few days, we will have the final meeting for all important issues to work on the final position. So we'll find it out. Thank you, Taras. Let's come to business, which has the possibility, first of all, to mention their position in terms of to which extent the state policy meets the needs that are there. But most often, most likely, it's also important just to hear business, to make sure that from the daily practical activity in your sector, they can tell us what are the tendencies and what is behind this daily level in very specific businesses, behind those general figures that we are discussing in the first presentation. So, Vyacheslav, please. Taras has opened up that regarding your sector, your main sector, the situation is not that bad, but in general, it's maybe even good. But how, in general, as business, how you see the development of this? Good afternoon, Hlib. Good afternoon, colleagues. Many thanks for the participation possibility in this discussion. I would not open any secret that this year the prices for all commodities have gone down. That also is about sugar, as Taras properly mentioned. For 2 years in a row, we have a very good export potential for sugar, taking into account production and consumption in Ukraine. So the last marketing year we just ended, it was almost 700,000 tons of exports with the production we can see consensus. Of course, some sugar beets is still in the field. I think it could be 1.6 million. We believe that some additional 500 to 600 tons, 1,000 tons, we are aligning our vision to make sure that we can also provide for the internal market and to export. But this export potential is here, and definitely Ukraine has gotten a certain possibility to export to the Mediterranean, to the Southern Africa. I'm talking about the sugar right now. I think most importantly, that's important to understand that this business is cyclical. Somebody must have found out some instrument not to be succeeding to this risk. We show the index NVDI, we're looking at it, and sometimes we're making decisions how to choose the changes and how not to invest too much, because of course there can't be a nice weather. So business is preparing the marginality, but not the share. It's important for the payment of taxes, also for the profitability of our activity. And the ones who refused from using the usage of fertilizers, and we understand that not everything requires, and some protection can be even deteriorated with these weather conditions. I would also agree to the figures in terms of certain losses of harvests in various oblasts. It's very clear that the early grains and the oilseeds gave the biggest possibility, the expected results. The rapeseed could even go back in price, and those who could, during its high price period, those who managed to sell it got quite good results compared to previous year and the 2 years ago. So I believe a lot of been said today. I want to say that the weather conditions force everybody to adapt, and what we are paying, what we are having as costs, but we are not the only ones on the market. There are other countries who also have the weather droughts and the underfulfillment of harvest. So, I mean, everything is balanced with the price. We can't maybe influence the price so highly, but the weather conditions have their tendencies in other countries. India, Europe, even our enemy lost a lot of wheat this year. Vyacheslav, I have two more questions for you. One question is more technical from Q&A. That's the question. I don't know, maybe it is based on some specifics that I don't know as an expert. Do you expect any deficit of fertilizers? Is there any basis for that? Or maybe you don't have any concerns? And the other question would be wider after you reply to this. In my activity, we don't feel any deficit for fertilizers. Moreover, it seems to me that the prices look sometimes better than it was in the previous periods. So from my side, I can't confirm this. Good. Then let's come to a more general question. Taras has really mentioned the directions of the state policy, how to support this sector in the conditions of these climatic changes. First of all, would you agree with this range of policies and those instruments which are proposed by the ministry? Do you believe it's important to add something to that? And whether Astarta itself, do you use and do you plan to use these mechanisms? And as far as I know, Astarta is very active internationally. You're actively working with international partners, so using the possibilities that are coming from the donors. what could the company use and what exactly from various instruments of support and what exactly is becoming popular in the sector from what you're seeing from competitors. It seems to me that we have a significant increase of grant programs and the support of international donors thanks to the USAID program, which we are seeing in Ukraine, and that's in the first place aimed at strengthening possibilities for exports. It seems to me that many of the companies received support from railway cars, possibilities of transshipment, drying the grain, its accumulation, and you said there were a lot of programs and there was also some state support. We from our side used the possibility to support USAID and we received both as railway cars that deliver our products for export as well as some sources of alternative power, energy and loads. The programs that we are talking in the future, the upcoming programs, they're aimed at processing. So there are programs which in essence stimulate to have added value on the territory of Ukraine, to do more processing. And I'm also sure that many of the companies, including us, we submit to these programs, knowing that we are building, I guess that's the only object in Ukraine in and these programs that Taras said, they are for the future to create conditions for decreasing the climatic changes, to make sure that we do the sustainable growth of products. And that's a very key element of the partnership, public and private, because the infrastructure itself that we have, it does require recovery, and where in many cases this infrastructure is with the state ownership, we are a public company, we are always for the effective public-private partnership and we are ready to invest within the understandable conditions, so together with the state. So there is a certain logic of these programs, the state support and international donorship, and now I believe everybody is looking at these things that pertain to the future.
Thank you so much. Last question from my side. Natalia, probably you would like to add something, any questions? Maybe you would like to summarize what was mentioned by colleagues. Maybe you have something to add from what has come to your mind during this discussion. The last risk zone, risk area. Our event is called Drought and War. We discussed drought, war, but if we speak about sugar business and the energy provision, energy supply. So you work, and the other those working with the grains, you process, while those working with the grain need to harvest the grain and export it or import. And if it's the third winter after the full-scale invasion, so you have already prepared, you have created your generative capacities, maybe you reserved some alternative energy, and maybe any other possibilities for importing energy. From the point of view of sugar plants, those built on the territory of Ukraine and which function during the USSR times, they are provided with the turbines through producing the steam, they generate the electricity. So we are self-sufficient with the energy when producing sugar. It's about the whole sugar industry in Ukraine. And we also have learned how to convert into biogas and into energy, so we can convert the remains of our production. And we use biogas in our production, so we add cogeneration, we will be self-sufficient completely. And we definitely are quite reserved about this. The main factor for us all is that all of the industries of economy to be provided with the energy supply, but we have proved that we are resilient. And even during the previous winters, we could use Drought, biomass, and other gases. So we survived last winter, we can survive this winter. So small entities should be built near the sugar plant rather than nuclear power plant. Definitely, with the small the radius for to deliver though to make the logistic from the sugar plant to those small entities, the better. All right, Natalia, it's over to you for the final comment. I would like to use this possibility to ask one more question to Vyacheslav, as he very nicely mentioned, usually producers target the margin rather than gross component, and definitely we can see unfavorable consequences as a result. But I would like to ask your opinion about the perspectives of profit of main segments you work within. As we could see for this segment of plant growing, those domestic pricing for grains have increased as logistics comes back to its working mode. As for the sugar, the prices are still low. And as Taras Mykolaievich has mentioned, droughts and domestic prices for dairy products increasing, and how can it impact the segment's productivity and profitability? So Natalia, you are like a banker and investor. It's really great question. It's reached the apple, as not all the sugar is in the bag, not all of the beets are in the storage space. So we can only speak about the expectations, perspectives. As for now, the oil processing industry comes to the pre-war marginality. So we come back to our margin. The peak margin was when there were some biases about the oil crops. Now we come to our pre-war margin, and they cover quite average if we speak about sunflower oil, soybeans, if we speak about sugar. From the point of view of export potential, again, we should speak about the following, that export currency component, FX component, that helps us to get the euro and dollar revenue, gives us the possibility to get the effect from the potential devaluations. In particular, this year, sugar, when producing, there was one exchange rate. When selling our products, there was another exchange rate. So now we can see that marginality comes back to our pre-war times level. But it's difficult to speak about precise numbers as we don't have our crops in storage yet. We spoke about animal breeding, animal growing, and cows are really live animals, live organisms. It's difficult for them to live in such a heat, so they also survive undergo this impact of weather, and it impacts the pricing respectively. So we should definitely maintain the standards and the quality of products, like we should air condition the spaces, we should maintain the sustainable temperature for dairy products, for example. If we speak about sugar, we come to the zero balance between the production and consumption. It can even the margin to the average numbers and amounts, and the grains are decreasing on their own. So I think that now to expect anything, any numbers now, as logistics is not over and production is not over, so it's difficult to speak about precise numbers, figures. All right, thank you. As a follow-up to your response, I can summarize that we discussed in details the dynamics of the expected export and yields and harvest for this year, but we should mention that it's only one of the components of this equation. If we speak about the impact of agro sector into macro sector, macro level of economy in Ukraine, as Vyacheslav has mentioned, indeed, the prices are not high. If it's for sugar, the prices are lower. If we speak about grains, export prices are at the level of the previous years, so the dynamics of pricing will not permit to cover the decrease of the export this year. So the export revenue may be lower, but it's important to summarize that in such conditions, circumstances, Ukrainian agro sector continues being a sustainable and self-sufficient business despite the unfavorable conditions. Agrarians continue sowing, producing, manufacturing, cropping, and will try to do it to be profitable, to be independent from any dotations, and it makes us sustainable from the point of view of the food security in the country and was the big player on the big international food market. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, all of the participants of today's panel discussion. Thank you, dear colleagues, for preparing our presentation. Thank you, Mr. Taras, who joined us, and we could see the person who plays the main role in the state policy as for this area. Thank you, Tetiana, for joining our discussion. Have a nice evening, Vyacheslav. I wish you to have high marginality, Natalia asked about, and see you and the participants and listeners and attendees of our event and trying to understand what is going on with the economy the next month. See you next month. Thank you for the